Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is part 4 of my Knights of the Frozen Throne card review. 7 new cards were actually revealed already since my last review, including 2 new Legendaries and 5 other class cards, so I have a lot to talk about. So here's how this is going to work. First off, I'll be discussing each card at great length, spending a few minutes or more going into detail about what I think about each of these cards. But if you don't have time for all that and you just want to see the card reveals, I have included a link in the description that will take you towards the end of the video where I'll be doing really quick fire 5-star reviews for every single card so you can just see them and get my overall assessment. But I do hope you'll stick around and listen to some of my thoughts and theories on these cards because I think it'll be pretty interesting. So let's go ahead and jump into this review. The first card up for review is the new Mage Legendary Sindragosa. We were pretty sure this one was coming, a pretty popular and prominent character and raid boss from Icecrown Citadel. Turns out she's going to be a mage card. She's an 8/8 dragon with a cool little battle cry, no pun intended. Summon 2/0/1 frozen champions. And then as you can see here on the right side of the screen, a frozen champion is merely a 0/1 minion that has a death rattle. Add a random legendary minion to your hand. So 8/8 in stats for an 8-mana card. It's fair. It's certainly nothing exciting or crazy. So clearly this one's all about the upside of this battle cry where you play these 2 frozen champions. Theoretically these die, and then essentially Sindragosa has generated 2 legendary minions for your hand. But I have a lot of problems with how this card works, and I don't actually think it's going to be very good because it takes a long time to get any value out of these frozen champions, or at least it takes some additional resources. It's just not that good. Sindragosa herself, merely an 8/8. That's a fine 8-mana play, but without taunt or some sort of active effect, that's really, really slow against a lot of decks. They could just ignore her or taunt through her and just continue pushing face or doing what they want to do. They can accomplish their game plan. You play these frozen champions, and they don't necessarily just automatically die, right? They're not attacking. They're not boom bots where you can ensure that they're going to die the following turn unless you use your hero power to ping them, of course. But then that means you're basically expending 2 mana. You're losing access to your ping. You're restricting the flexibility of your future turns. And even then, after you kill your frozen champions, there are a lot of bad legendary minions in the game, guys. A ton of bad ones. Not just Millhouse Manastorm and Lorewalker Chobad, but there's a ton of like super high synergy legendary cards that don't necessarily do anything with your deck. We've all seen that from Elise, where you get a legendary and an Unguro pack from Elise, the Trailblazer, and it's just like, what do I do with this Spirit Singer Umbra? Like, I don't have Death Rattle cards in my hand. This is just a 3/4 minion. So half the time these frozen champions are going to low roll you and give you really bad cards. They cost a lot to activate. Sindragosa herself doesn't do anything. Like, yes, this is a value play if you played this in a super grindy style mage, of which there have been some that are successful in the past. Clearly this is the kind of card that can give you back a lot of resources. You know, even if you hit a couple mid-tier legendaries and you're playing against another grindy or slower deck, that's going to be enough probably to give you a large advantage. But in every other scenario, every other matchup, this feels really slow, too hard to work with, too inflexible. I don't think any of the dragon synergies are particularly relevant to mage that we can see so far. So it feels like there's just a lot of stuff here that's really slow and really hard to actually accomplish. I mean, another perspective to approach this card from is comparing it to other cards that have been somewhat similar. The most apt comparison that comes to mind for me is Nefarian, the Blackrock Mountain card. You know, he was another dragon, a similar cost range. He gave you 2 cards, but he did it instantly. They didn't take any sort of activation or additional mana cost to actually pull them out like these frozen champions presumably do, because of course your opponent's not going to willy-nilly kill the frozen champions for you. And not to mention, spells on average are better than the average legendary minion. I really believe that, just because there's so many bad legendaries out there. There's fewer bad spells. Sure, there's the Totemic Mites, but there's also the Lorewalker Chos. Not to mention, spells are often a little bit more flexible and a little bit more active. So some legendaries you get off these frozen champions are also going to be super slow plays after you've already committed to a slow play. Whereas with Nefarian, they give you sometimes more catch-up potential on average. Another comparison is really Medivh. Medivh is the card like this that's ran in this slot for mages now, where you're committing quite a bit of mana to just a 7/7 minion in that turn. But the difference between Medivh and Sindragosa is on the following turn, the Medivh is immediately rewarding you. In other words, the mana that you're spending that following turn to activate that Atiesh weapon that summons you a new minion, that's mana you want to spend anyway. That's the Flame Strike you're casting because you want to cast Flame Strike, or Firelands Portal. Like, you're getting something out of the mana you spend. And you're getting that additional minion, so it's a pretty significant tempo advantage. Medivh essentially banks 3 turns, or at least 3 minions worth of tempo. Sindragosa actually doesn't unlock that tempo at all. If you ping these Frozen Champions, you still have to spend the mana on the legendary minion you get, so she's a far slower play than Medivh, and I would argue still on average not that strong. So a lot of issues here, a very slow card. I want to like it because I love Sindragosa, but at the end of the day, I just think it's going to be too slow for a vast majority of metas. Maybe she finds a spot in some sort of like Reno mage or really grindy style mage, some really, really greedy control mage that has tons of defensive tools, or if the meta slows down a ton, it's possible, but at the end of the day, still not going to do it for me. So let's move on to the next card here, another mage card. Sorry about the pixely artwork, that's because Blizzard released like the tiniest image ever in their blog post revealing this card. But this is the Coldwraith, a new 3-mana 3/4 minion with a battle cry. If an enemy is frozen, draw a card. So a freeze synergy card here, and actually a fairly okay one, I think, because at the end of the day, what is this? This is a 3-mana 3/4, historically a stat line that's been underrepresented in Hearthstone, but often attached to really good cards, just because it's the kind of thing that trades so darn favorably in the early to mid game. We've seen many other cards at this allocation work really well, the stat allocation work really well, if they have a strong battle cry or some sort of strong effect or death rattle, whatever it might be. Coldwraiths is not bad. I think it's pretty hard to activate just because right now we don't know a lot of mages that are consistently freezing things. But even in your average mage deck with just Frostbolts, with just the random spells that you always generate off of Primordial Glyphs and whatever other card generation card you happen to be running in your specific mage list, of which there are like 1,000, whether it's Kabbalist Tome or anything else, you tend to find a freeze spell here and there. There's already a few freeze spells in your deck. So there's going to be instances where that Coldwraith actually is an activated battle cry that draws you a card, in which case this becomes a very strong card, right? A 3-mana 3/4 that cycles for you is fantastic. So when it hits, I think this is a dream card, because basically you get to play a nice on-tempo minion and still actually draw a card simultaneously. Whereas in the past, you play like Acolyte of Pain, maybe you get 2 cards, but you're losing the board, you're not able to make trades against aggressive decks, and you fall really far behind. Coldwraith prevents you from falling behind while still simultaneously drawing a card when things go really well. Now, obviously, granted, there's going to be a lot of instances where you just play it as a 3-mana 3/4 against an aggressive deck, but you're going to be okay with that, because if you queue into a control deck, you can still use Coldwraith as card draw later in the game. You'll find opportunities, you'll find lines where you can freeze something, you can Frostbolt something to stall it, you can draw a freezing potion, whatever it might be. So Coldwraith sort of serves that double utility where it's an early game minion sometimes, but occasionally in the late game, it's a cycle card, it's just another body on the board. So it has that dual purpose, which I think makes it a good fit for Mage, who's often kind of trying to struggle to stay alive early, but also still generate value and generate cards and generate resources in the late game. So I actually think this card's going to fit fairly well. I guess it just depends how often it seems to hit or miss with the battle cry, which is a little bit hard to predict in practice, particularly, of course, as is the case with every card, when we don't know every card in the set. Who knows exactly how many freeze tools Mage might be getting. But even if they don't get any more, I still think this is a fairly viable card in my mind. I would not be surprised to see this one see some play. And then for the next card, this is actually another mage card, and you can start to detect a theme here that really does fit along with sort of the Jaina Frost Lich mentality, which is she's clearly got a lot of wraiths and ghasts following her around in the new mage set, which I think is pretty cool. This is the Ghastly Conjurer, a 4-mana 2/6 minion with a battle cry. Add a mirror image spell to your hand, and I actually like this minion quite a lot. I think this is a very strong card. First and foremost, just a 2/6 for 4. I mean, obviously not the most favorable stat line, right? We've seen other 4-mana 2/6s, and they never really felt like great plays for their stats. But when you have a card like this that's hard to kill, so it does linger around, it does make trades, it does set up things like ping trades and Frostbolt trades, like its body serves some utility to help you mitigate the board. which is really nice. So that, somewhat small attack value for a 4-drop is probably less bad to me in Mage than it would be in a lot of other classes, just because they have a lot of clean ways to set up trades and make smaller numbers play nicely together. So that's not a problem. But when you're generating a card like this, that's always really, really good. You're just adding some depth to your deck. Now, it's only a mirror image, so you're not creating anything crazy. But even then, mirror image is a frustrating little card to deal with, particularly when it's a card that you didn't have to carve out a spot in your deck list for. In other words, you're not sacrificing the value of that card slot. You're just getting a free little stall, a free little annoying spell that your opponent has to deal with. So it's really good against aggressive decks, in particular this card, I think, because the 2/6 not only trades favorably into smaller stuff a lot of the time. Imagine like, a token shaman, for instance. This is just cleaning up totems all day. But also that mirror image can be a frustrating thing for them to move through. A Pirate Warrior with an Arcanite Reaper, when you've got that banked mirror image in hand, can give you a lot of power and cause a lot of frustration. And you don't feel too bad about playing this 4-mana card in the first place. Not to mention, of course, there's all kinds of synergy lines here when you get a free, well, not a free mana cost, but a free mirror image in your deck, which is things like the quest, for instance, is another activator for the quest that's consistent, easy to cast, so you can slot it in a lot. It's the kind of thing that works really well with Archmage Antonidas to generate free fireballs. There's just a lot of ways for Mage to get value off of spells. Maybe there's a new Demented Frostcaller deck where you get a lot of cheap mirror images, you free stuff, and then you use your Coldwraith to draw additional cards, right? There's all kinds of crazy things that can happen when you get cheap, free, consistent spells added to your hand like those with Ghastly Conjurer. Because sometimes, if you're using the Primordial Glyphs and other spells to generate new cards, you get high-cost stuff. It's a little bit harder to use, a little less flexible. Whereas with Ghastly Conjurer, you know exactly what you're getting every time. There's also some power in actually giving that knowledge to your opponent, because they can change their plays a little bit around it, but at the end of the day, they know you have access to 2 cheap taunts that might really frustrate them and dictate them to make inefficient plays. Even if you hold on to that mirror image for a while, it might be changing their lines to suit it. So I actually like this card a lot. If you think about it from a pure stat standpoint, right, for 5 mana, you're basically getting 2/10 in stats, which is 12 total stats, or 6/6 for 5 mana. Clearly, it doesn't work quite that equivalently. It's distributed in a much different way, but still, the raw stat value's there, the flexibility's there, the body is there. I think it works in a couple of different Mage decks, whether you're trying to slow people down or generate those free spells. So I think this is a fairly playable card. I think it's not just restricted to Quest Mage or like an Antonidas combo style Mage at all. I think it can move beyond that. It's good in Arena too. I think it's a solid Arena card. So I like Ghastly Conjurer a lot. So now let's move on to a new Shaman card called the Voodoo Hexxer. This is a 5-mana minion. It's a 2/7 and it has Taunt. But also, not only does it have Taunt, it has, in effect, freeze any character damaged by this minion. So I saw a comment on Reddit actually that said this is what happens when Allie Armorsmith and Water Elemental have a baby. And that's exactly right. It feels exactly like that kind of card. I mean, the first and most obvious comparison to me was Allie Armorsmith, because clearly it's a 5-mana taunt. It's a 2/7. And much like Allie Armorsmith has an additional sort of defensive component where it gives you armor, so does Voodoo Hexxer. It freezes stuff out. So I really like this card a lot. I think this is a strong one. It's going to be fantastic in any sort of control shaman-style deck, of which we've always seen that thing lingering around near the top tiers of Hearthstone. It seems like control shaman's always just a few cards away from being really dominant, and this is another tool that it can utilize. And frankly, I think the freeze aspect is just as good, if not better, than Allie Armorsmith's additional armor aspect. You get a little less value from attacking a face, but if minions trade into this and they don't die to the attack, which is often the case with a 2-attack minion, but if your opponent's trading minions in, when they get frozen like that, they basically lose the entire next turn. So it's like 2 more turns before they can attack, essentially, which is a long time for a minion to be stuck on the board, which means, if they're contributing additional minions to the board, suddenly things like Volcano get stronger, Lightning Storms get stronger, because you've got minions with chipped health totals just laying around, and your opponent's probably piling up a couple additional extra minions because they're just trying to spend their mana in an efficient way. So I think this works really well with what Sean's trying to do. You could also just freeze the enemy's face sometimes and lock out those Pirate Warriors like you see with Water Elemental. I mean, this is a giant stomp in the face to Pirate Warrior style decks, right? Where they're super aggressive and weapon based. So everything on this works to me. I don't see any problems with this card. Allie Armorsmith has proven the model that it makes sense. And some people might say that Allie Armorsmith is only good because Taunt Warrior has to run taunts. But I disagree with that. It's been running Control Warrior decks, Tempo Warrior decks. It's just a solid card. It's a lot of stats for somebody to move through and adds back passive value as well. So I think Voodoo Hexxer's in the exact same place. Some people are going to say, doesn't this make Icebreaker a good card? Still don't think so. I still think Icebreaker takes way too long. Frankly, you know, if a minion is hitting your face and doing damage to this minion and you're trying to remove them with Icebreaker, that minion's already gotten a ton of value, right? It's hit your face, it's hit a minion to do damage, it has very little life left. So the Icebreaker charge killing it, this is not the kind of card that sets up good Icebreaker plays in my mind. So I don't think this is an Icebreaker synergy card at all. You'd have to have freezes that denied any sort of value from the minion if you wanted to use Icebreaker in an efficient way. So this is certainly not enough to turn the corner on Icebreaker. I don't think Icebreaker is ever going to be a good card for the record. Every Shaman card could be a freeze card. Still don't like Icebreaker, so definitely not in this case. But otherwise, beyond that, Voodoo Hexxer is still a great card. Giving more freeze effects to Shaman is pretty nifty too, so I'm excited to see that path with this fun and strong card. Up next is a Warrior card, and again, I apologize for the artwork. This is because Blizzard uploaded like a postage stamp of the card, so this is a recreation of that. But this is a 2-mana spell called Bring It On, everybody's favorite cheerleader movie of the early 2000s. And it gives you 10 armor, but it also reduces the cost of minions in your opponent's hand by 2. So clearly a huge downside here. You know, double tick Emperor Thaurissan on minions for your opponent's card, and really all you get out of it is 10 armor. So some shaky math here to be sure. At first glance, that sounds really, really terrible. At a slightly deeper glance, I don't think it's probably as bad as people are thinking right away. If you really assess this, I mean, there's a lot of times where you need 10 armor when your opponent has virtually 0 minions on board, or 0 minions in hand, excuse me. You know, if a Pirate Warrior has just unloaded on you, their hand is empty, and you're desperately clawing for life, this would be a perfect card. You could, you know, gain 10 armor and basically do nothing for them, and you get a 1-card 10 armor infusion really, really efficiently as far as mana is concerned. You might also sneak in a hero power and a weapon, right? So that kind of play is crazy good, and I think that's the kind of play this card was ultimately designed for. And then again, even in a control v control environment, giving it a discount to your opponent's minions is not great, because you just give them so much flexibility. But often it's not terrible either. I mean, there are always those games in control decks where you're holding back resources anyway, and you have a lot of mana you're floating anyway, because you don't want to overload into a brawl, you don't want to play into too much removal, you want to save your resources over time to kind of suss them out and make smart plays and good reads. So in those kinds of things, a 2-mana discount probably wouldn't matter a ton either. Clearly there's some major fails like Gadgetzan Auctioneer and Archmage Antonidas. Making those cheaper can really backfire, so still some problems if you don't read it correctly. But in other words, I don't actually think the downside of this card with the reduce the cost of minions in your opponent's hand is really that problematic. It's a problem. Clearly you'd have to play it incredibly intelligently or you would fail miserably. But I don't actually think that's why this card is not that good. And for the record, I don't think this card is that good. I think it's just simply that gaining 10 armor with a spell probably isn't enough to make up a card slot in your deck. We've seen like Ironhide, for instance, which I actually forgot the name of that card. I had to look it up. If that tells you anything about Ironhide. Really one of the few Unguro cards that in my mind has just been an abject failure. Just completely unplayable almost. In other words, gaining 5 armor for 1 mana, it just doesn't do enough. There's other armor gain cards that accomplish other things. And every time we've seen an armor gain card that was really prominent in a control warrior environment, it was one that did something. So Shield Block was really about the cycle. It gives you 5 armor, but you get to draw a card, and that's what makes it so good. With a card like Bash, it was really about doing 3 damage, not just getting 3 armor. We've never really seen Ironforge Portal take off, but it had a side value advantage as well. Even looking back to things like Ancient Shield Bearer or Shield Maiden, the old GVG card, those were attached to pretty big bodies and they gave you armor. So you're getting that body and influence on the board as well. You just don't seem to want to run a pure armor gain style card in Control Warrior because it just doesn't offer anything extra. So I don't know. Despite how good this might be against Freeze Mage decks, Control Warriors are already great against Freeze Mage decks. So that just feels like overkill. I don't think it's necessary there. So I actually still think this is a pretty bad card, just not probably for the reason that's most obvious or most apparent based on its card text, although that is also a pretty small problem because there's so many times where you just don't have anything to do on turn 2 and you're like, okay, well crap, can I cast Bring It On to get some armor on turn 2? No, that Pirate Warrior still has 5 cards in hand because he's only played one thing on turn 1. I guess I can't play this card, and you maybe feel a little bad, just happy to hero power up, but ultimately I just don't think it offers you enough in a deck and in a game, frankly, that needs each card to contribute quite a bit to the overall plan. Health is certainly a resource, but it's one that you're often willing to sacrifice to gain more instant and more valuable things immediately. So Bring It On just doesn't accomplish that, and there's just so much risk involved as well. It's not good enough as a brawl bait. It's not good enough as a aggro empty hand tool to make up for other cards that you could just run in this slot that probably do more consistently. I have one more 2-mana spell here that unfortunately I just don't think is very good. This time it is the Rogue's Vampiric Poison, 2-mana spell that gives your weapon lifesteal. So I have to say, like, I'm happy that Blizzard is addressing the fact that Rogue needs heal, and that Rogue needs heal because they're using their weapon all the time to take damage for removal, so it's just hard to stay alive and hard to keep your health total at a reasonable level. So this is the kind of card that addresses that issue that's been around for a very long time. So I'm happy to see that the idea is there in Blizzard's mind, but unfortunately I just can't see this card actually giving you enough back for it to make sense. So imagine like the ideal scenario that we currently know of where you put this on, say, an Assassin's Blade, sort of the big go-to rogue weapon. Even if you give it like a Deadly Poison, right, and you've got yourself a 5-attack Assassin's Blade, and then you decide to give it lifesteal, that's a heal 20. It's a really, really efficient heal for 2 mana, heal 20, right? But at the end of the day, that still takes 4 turns for you to accomplish. It doesn't actually help you address the board in any given way, shape, or fashion. You're still spending 7 mana to do all that. Now, clearly, you're getting some value back with your Assassin's Blade, of course. It's not 7 mana just to heal, but it's still a very expensive play. So basically, you're spending 7 mana, but you're distributing that mana's value across 4 turns. So you essentially take 1 turn where you spend 7 mana. Or no, it's 8 mana. I didn't even do the math right. It's 8 mana. So you're spending 8 mana to distribute, because I forgot the Deadly Poison, but you're spending 8 mana across 4 turns, right? So you basically get 2 mana's worth of value every single turn. That means you're sacrificing 6 mana that first turn, where you're not really accomplishing much. You're just banking all that future value. That's a lot to sacrifice just to set up a heal and a little bit of removal, right? So you're still putting yourself in a really risky position to accomplish that. And then, of course, you also have to run Assassin's Blade in your deck, which historically has never been something a rogue has wanted to do because it's such a slow weapon. Or you have to run Deadly Poisons or some sort of weapon support, or weapons that you haven't ran in the past, because frankly, Rogue doesn't have very many good weapons. So ultimately, you're compromising your deck, you're committing to a fairly slow play. It's defensive, but it's not tempo or board oriented. So it has to be in a very specific kind of deck to ever make this work. If you don't have the weapon, Vampiric Poison is a dead card because you can't put it on your hero power. Rogue often doesn't even want to sacrifice their hero power, because then if you just deploy a weapon, you don't get to use your hero power ever. Your hero power becomes useless. Maybe that changes, of course, in a Death Knight scenario. Perhaps that's where this card is leading. There's going to be some sort of rogue Death Knight where they get an awesome weapon or some sort of really cheap 3-1 weapon or 3-2 weapon where Vampiric Poison consistently makes a lot more sense. That's this card's one saving grace. Even then, though, at the end of the day, it's like, if it's on a 3-2, that's a 2-mana heal 6. That's like a Holy Light. That's not a particularly exciting card, right? So the math is going to have to work out really favorably for this to be a really exciting card, because it needs to get to 10 health, 12 health, 15 health for this to make a lot of sense. And often that means you got to play it on a really big, sensible weapon. Otherwise, I'm not sure it's worth sacrificing a slot in your list again. Just a lower powered 2-mana spell that doesn't directly address anything that's just about heal are not the kinds of spells we've consistently seen. Other than maybe like, Healing Wave and Shaman, but that was like the world's most defensive deck, and I don't know that Rogue necessarily has those tools. So again, another card that seems to just fall a little short, but I like the idea of it. The anti-aggro, the slow control style, all looks good. It's just I don't think this is the right card to make it work. But this is one that, you know, if the right pieces come out, don't give up total hope on Vampiric Poison. The right deck, the right pieces. The fact that it is a spell is important historically in Rogue. They like spells, especially cheap stuff, to set up combos, to power the Gadgets and Auctioneers of the world, etc. So there's a glimmer of hope for this card. I'll put it that way. I think it's very bad right now, bad on the surface, hard to work with, but a small, tiny glimmer of hope that someday it could actually be halfway decent. And now finally for my last card is the other legendary I have to talk about today. This time it's Professor Putricide, a 4-mana hunter minion. It's got 5/4 in stats, and he's all about secrets. With this effect, after you play a secret, you put a random hunter secret into the battlefield. So you play Professor Putricide, he stays alive, you play another secret, you get one additional random secret automatically put into play for free. And that's a nice little value, you know, card generation kind of play. You basically double the value of your secret, or you can kind of think of it as having the mana cost into, you get like a 1-mana secret and another 1-mana secret, both for 2 mana, which, you know, it's solid, but I don't think it's an amazing play. A lot of people are really excited about this card. I've tempered my expectations a lot more than that. I don't think it's that significant, right? The only way this card gets really exciting is with Cloaked Huntress, right? If you play a Cloaked Huntress first, and then you play Professor Putricide, and then you play a secret, you play multiple secrets, frankly. You still have to have a few in hand to make this combo work, and that's ultimately the problem. But with Cloaked Huntress, you could basically play a secret, get a free secret, play a secret, get a free secret, and then you could play a third secret, but a hero can only hold 5 secrets on their hero portrait. You can't play 6. So ultimately, in a single turn, Professor Putricide can ever only give you 2 free secrets, which is essentially kind of like a 4-mana value generation. The problems with that particular combo, of course, you do it on curve, Cloaked Huntress has to live a couple turns, which is not always likely to happen. If you also do it on curve, you have to use most of your hand, because that's 4 cards by turn 4, if you want to get the max value secrets, or maybe even 5 cards if you wanted to play a third secret. So you basically empty your hand to accomplish what could be countered pretty easily by an Eater of Secrets, or you know, a Flare, those kinds of cards. Although that's not, we can't really consider tech cards as a weakness for a card, really. But anyway, you'd run out of cards, and you'd have to make Professor Putricide, your secrets, and Cloaked Huntress pretty much a game-winning play, because it'd be really hard to follow up, especially if your deck is filled with random secrets, and top-decking one of those likely isn't very strong. So a lot of risk assumed with that play. Clearly a very high tempo play, because you get 10 mana worth of secrets out basically for free with Cloaked Huntress into Professor Putricide, which is crazy kinds of tempo. That's so much value onto the board instantly. So that's the dream, but that's such a hard dream to accomplish, right? You have to get Professor Putricide in your hand to make that work, in your opening hand, and you only have one of them in your deck. It's not like a 2-of card that's more consistent, so a very hard combo to pull off. You have to play your Cloaked Huntress, hope she survives. That's an accomplishment in and of itself, with so many ways to kill a 4-health card by presumably your opponent's turn 4, coin turn 3, or whatever it might be. So Jade Lightnings of the world, Frostbolt Pings of the world, etc., etc., etc. You know, there's a lot of ways to kill that kind of card. Plus, your opponent knows it's a high-value target, and if they're playing against a hunter, they know it's something you can run, so they're looking to kill it. So really hard to pull off that particular ordering, and of course you have to have the secrets in hand too, so it's not just Huntress into Putricide, it's also Huntress into Putricide into multiple secrets to gain value. So I think that combo is just like the pipe dream. It happens 1 out of 50 games, and doesn't even always win you the game, because a lot of times your opponent won't have to activate those secrets instantly. There's so many secrets that they might take 4 or 5 turns to activate, that frankly you don't even get the value of all that tempo you spent to get until much way down the road, when you've ran out of cards and ran out of gas and your opponent is starting to stabilize. So that's another risk with just playing all those secrets at once. You know, plus some things like, you know, against certain matchups, Explosive Trap just doesn't do anything against a Control Warrior. Like, they don't care. So some secrets are just going to be wasted. Hidden Cache. There's a few bad Hunter secrets that could come off of Professor Putricide here that you don't run in your deck. Not to mention a lot of secrets can backfire too. I don't mean to sound like a downer. I know I sound like a downer. I know it's everybody wants to like new legendaries. The card is fine. I'm trying to temper people's expectations, because I think people get really excited about all these crazy potential combos that are just too hard to execute on and not consistent enough to ever really matter or be the decisive, you know, defining aspect of a deck. you don't build a deck around Cloaked Huntress, Professor Putricide, in my opinion. Because as we know right now, secrets aren't even really good enough to make the cut in normal hunter decks. That's not what works right now. Now, clearly, that's not in and of itself an indication that Putricide is bad, because secrets have been good in the past, so there's potential for them to be good again, including perhaps new secrets that are added to the set with Knights of the Frozen Throne. Because at a surface level, I like Putricide. He's okay. He's got good stats for his cost. 5/4 is great for Hunter in particular, because it can do some damage. The effect is all upside. It's just free secrets. But outside of that combo, it's sort of a 6-mana play where it's, Professor Putricide into a 2-mana secret. So that's fairly slow. And you just, you're really just kind of getting 2 free mana out of it, which compared to a lot of other plays in Hearthstone, it doesn't feel like there's that much upside to get 2 free mana out of a single card. There's a lot of other ways to do way more when it comes to tempo or doing something on the board. There's better 4-drops, for instance. So, as far as stats and values are concerned. So you're kind of sacrificing a little bit with Putricide just because he has vanilla stats. But it's still a value play at the end of the day. This is the kind of card to me that could be run. It could be run in a mid-range deck with some secrets teched in. It could be run in a control deck for sure, a control hunter deck with some secrets added in, the freezing traps and those kinds of things that are sometimes really valuable control tools. So it's fine. A lot of the pieces are in place. I just don't think they fit together very well. I don't think this is a deck-defining card. I don't think you build a Secret Hunter because you have Professor Putricide or Cloaked Huntress. I think there's a lot of issues with making this thing an efficient card. I think it's often just a sort of a filler card that maybe makes the cut. And at the end of the day, I don't really think it sees all that much play. I think that this is another fairly weak Hunter Legendary. I understand that there's really a lot of value in value generation like this, but it's fairly expensive for what Hunters wanted to do historically. It requires multiple cards to accomplish that value. Hunter secrets at the end of the day don't often do that much. So, in other words, they don't destroy cards necessarily. They often just are tempo plays or buffs or a little bit free minions. There's nothing crazy happening off secrets. So when I compare this to something like Lyra, for instance, where I look at Lyra, slightly more expensive, but somewhat similar stat line, but her potential is basically limitless, and she can chain herself forever. This card doesn't look remotely close to Lyra. This card requires you to have those resources in hand constantly. It's not chaining into secret into secret into secret into secret. You're never developing 5 secrets off your Professor Putricide. You have to use cards that are already in your deck to make that work. Lyra can just chain forever and do crazy things and build you so many resources. And this is a class legendary minion, so why can't it be a little closer to Lyra? I just don't. I think there's just a cap on how much value this can actually accomplish. And frankly, that cap is very obviously 4 mana. This is only ever going to give you 4 free mana worth of cards, because you play a secret, you get 1 for free. You play a secret, you get 1 for free. If you play a 3rd secret, if you spent 10 mana in a single turn, you don't get a free secret. Your board is full of secrets. Can't play another one. So there's a 4 mana cap on how much value this gives you. So it's not as good as Mysterious Challenger. It's not remotely as good as Lyra. The other cards I can compare this thing to just don't seem to fit to me. I don't think I like it. I hate to say that because so many people want to like this card. I think it got a lot of people excited. But at the end of the day, to me, it's just really hard to utilize. And I think you got to compromise your deck a little bit to make it work. And I just don't think you're going to find turns where you feel like Professor Putricide makes a lot of sense. I think he's going to feel awkward more often than he feels powerful, which is certainly problematic for a one-of legendary in your deck that requires a very specific complement of cards to actually power. So to me, Professor Putricide has some problems. And on that somewhat somber note, that was my part 4 card review. Some pretty solid cards here, though, I think, at the end of the day. Some good ones. A couple weak ones, too, of course. That's always going to be the case. A couple average ones, in fact, as well. Pretty good distribution of cards, perhaps, in that discussion. But now what I'd like to do is just real quickly run through each of the cards that I discussed in great detail there and assign each of them a rating from 1 to 5 stars so you can kind of get my overall take. And, of course, you can put a screenshot up 2 months down the road when all these cards have come out, showing just how wrong I was about a given card, because that's always a lot of fun too. So at this point, let's go ahead and jump into my quick reviews. Up first is Sindragosa. I think this is a 2-star card. After that, we got Coldwraith. I think this is a 3-star card. Up next is Ghastly Conjurer, which I'm giving 4 stars. The Voodoo Hexxer to me is another 4-star card. Bring It On is a 2-star card. And Vampiric Poison is a 1-star card, but very, very close to a 2-star card. I was actually a little bit torn. I think, like I said, there is a glimmer of hope for this one to be halfway decent somewhere down the road with the right synergy pieces. But for now, it remains a 1-star card. And then finally, Professor Putricide. I'm going to get some hate for this one, I think. But unfortunately, I'm going to just give this one 2 stars. Somewhere deep down in my heart, I want to give it 3 stars. But really, the more I talk about it, the more I look at it, the more I think this card's just going to be too hard to use. So it stays at 2 stars for me, maybe 2.5 if I'm being very generous. But I'm sticking to my ratings here. So 2 stars for Professor Putricide. And there you go, guys. That's it for my Part 4 review. So if you guys have any thoughts, comments, questions on these cards, of course, I'd love to hear your take. There's been a ton of great discussion in the comments for each of my reviews so far. I love reading it. I know you guys love arguing amongst yourselves as well. It's a lot of fun to discuss and theorize about these cards and hope and dream that certain things are going to work and certain things don't. So I'm super excited to see everything that you've got to say. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, game on.